Hey Heidi, decided to make risotto again tonight. So I thought I'd show you a couple steps that may help and make it a little easier. I add one small onion, and I'll write all this up for you, and I chop it up into little bits and just cook it until it's translucent and really fragrant. I usually start out with probably about 2 or 3 tablespoons of really good olive oil. Some people use a couple tablespoons of olive oil and maybe like a tablespoon of butter. I'm not necessarily a huge butter fan, but also a lot of people add 1 or 2 tablespoons of butter at the end just to give the risotto some body. So once the onions get cooked and look good to you, my pan is, the pot I use is a, it's actually a pot, not a pan, which you may want to try to do, but it's cast iron, but it's coated with enamel. Le Creuset makes those, so that's what I like to use because it just keeps down some of the sticking. So the onions look pretty good, and what I do is I add about maybe 1.5 cups of the arborio rice. I'm just going to dump that right in, and as soon as I add it, I just start stirring it to absorb all the onion and the rest of the olive oil in there. People who do this say when you do this step, it really helps to break down the carbs that are in the rice. And when you do that, it makes the risotto kind of really creamy as you start to cook it. So I do this for a few minutes, but you got to keep stirring it so the rice doesn't stick or start to burn. That's the big thing here. I actually need a wider angle lens on this phone. I don't know if you can see this very well. Okay, so everything is pretty. I tend to stop and start to add some of the liquid when the rice starts to still feel a little sticky to the pot. So the next step I do is I add a whole cup of white wine, and some people add about 2/3 of a cup, but I love the flavor of the wine. So I don't know if you can see how much liquid is in there, but you're going to want to cook the wine off and have the rice absorb all of the wine flavor. And the wine and the onion, I think, make the risotto taste really kind of sweet. One of the things you can back down on is how much onion you use. Some recipes call just for a half onion, but I generally try to pick a smallish, sweet yellow onion. I don't know what I gave you, but you can pick and choose. So what I do is, while this is kind of simmering away and the wine is in there with the rice and the onion, is I just keep stirring it until a lot of it is absorbed. But on the back burner, I have the chicken stock that is kind of on a really kind of low simmer. And this way it's ready to go and at the right temperature for when I need it. So, okay, let me crank this up, see if we can get this cooking faster. It's hard to cook this stuff in a skillet, so I don't know what you're thinking. If you have like a saute pan that is maybe the sides on it are about 3 or 4 inches, it would probably work. So I don't know if you can tell, but you can see a lot of the wine has been absorbed by the rice. You can see it's kind of dry and no liquid. And so what I do from here is then I take a ladle of the chicken broth, and the ladle I use is probably about 4 or 5 ounces, and I just dump it right in there. And the ladle is enough to cover the rice. You actually have this cooking too high. You don't want it to boil that much. You just want to have control over it. But the liquid should cover the rice, Heidi. But you want to keep stirring it so it doesn't stick, because all the starches are starting to come out of the rice. And so when that liquid gets absorbed, I'll add another ladle of broth. So the chicken stock I make, Heidi, doesn't have much salt in it, and so it's kind of during these stages that if you want a little bit more salt, and I prefer kosher or sea salt, it's probably the time to add it. If you add it to the end, it doesn't blend as well, but just keep in mind that if you're going to decide to use butter, you may want to back off a little bit on any salt that you use. So you can see some of the liquid quickly being absorbed. I probably have the flame of the stove kind of on medium. Trying to do this fast for you so you can see a couple stages. So if you taste the rice, if you just get a little bit of the rice right now, it's going to be really crunchy and hard. And so what I do after maybe the third ladle is I start to taste it, because you don't want the rice to be really mushy. So I just added another ladle and covered the rice again. And we'll let that absorb. So, like I was saying, you don't want the rice to be really mushy, but kind of al dente. And that means a lot of different things to a lot of people. So, you want to still be able to distinguish the rice, but you also want it to be really creamy. This is really a basic risotto recipe. At the end of mine, I'm just going to add some asparagus and mushroom, and I don't mix that in until the very end. And like I said, at the end, if you mix anything into it, you may want to add some butter just for a little bit more texture. But as I said, I usually don't. And you just keep doing this until the rice cooks. So you can see, it's hard to tell if you can see like the liquid that's in there, but it's definitely covered the rice. And then when it cooks down, it gets absorbed. You just want to add more broth. And then just keep stirring it. I think what's hard about this dish is if you're cooking other things, it takes a lot of multitasking. So this past weekend when I was doing the chicken, I kind of cooked the chicken first and set it aside and kept it warm. And then I did the rice. But this whole process probably takes about 20 or 30 minutes. And once you get comfortable with the basic recipe of risotto, you don't always have to use chicken stock. You can use seafood stock. I remember one time I made this for you and Jody and Michelle, and I used vegetable stock. Or you can just do a red wine risotto, which is really awesome, that is part red wine and part chicken or vegetable stock. So there's kind of a gazillion combinations. So I think you can see here that most of the liquid's been absorbed. So I'm going to add another ladle. Okay? Alrighty.